thank you for joining us on a Friday morning. It might be good if a few of you move to that side because I think we slowly have people coming in and I think they might have a harder time traversing all the way to the other side. I'm not sure if the other door is open. uh, Hopefully, them catching any session is better than. Yeah, sure. Okay. Um, Thank you very much for getting here on a Friday. It started off as a much brighter day, so we were hoping for okay, everybody will be able to get here a lot easier. But yeah, things always happen. I was afraid yesterday morning because when I got here at around 5 or 6, it was pouring down, and I think right after I got off the flight, I think there was an earthquake. I'm not sure if everyone knows that there was an earthquake yesterday. 4.4, 4.5. So I was like, yeah, everything is going off very well for our event. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us. We'll hopefully have a whole bunch of more people will be joining us throughout the day. Um, we have a bunch of interesting things to do. Thank you for taking the time out of your work on a Friday. We put together a number of very interesting panel discussions after the report launch, which in itself is very interesting. The report itself, and yeah, we hope you'll get to learn a lot over the course of the day. A lot of the panelists will be around throughout the entire day, but at the same time, some of them might have to leave early. So, if you're interested in talking to anyone about some of the things that they've talked about or their expertise, their specific field of expertise, it'll be great if you actually reach out to them and talk to them uh, right after the sessions happen or during one of the coffee breaks. We'll start off the day by talking about the report launch. We have a welcome address before that by Professor Pankaj Jalote, and we'll have Professor Arul and Professor Surya Prakash talking about the report after that. After that, we'll move on to a panel discussion. We'll probably have a short break right around that time, depending on how the time goes. We'll have lunch from 1 to 2, and then we'll go on to panel discussions after lunch. We have 3 different panel discussions, 4 over the course of the entire day, talking about the strategic importance of FOSS in India. We'll talk about the banking and financial sector and how FOSS is being used in that sector. We'll talk about FOSS in the software and IT services industry, and then we'll wrap up the day by talking about FOSS and education. Right? Interestingly, that exactly is how we got involved with Professor Jalote, where we started talking about how the students that are in his course on the software development using open source could actually start working on real life open source projects and contribute to them. And it's sort of very interesting how sort of these things take their own course, and we are doing the report launch here today. We also have a brief recorded address by Mr. Abhishek Singh, DG of NIC. We wanted to we hope to have him here, but last minute is he had an appointment which he wasn't able to skip, and gracefully he's given us a recorded message, and he's somebody who's been very active in the FOSS United community and overall in the FOSS community for many years. And yeah, I think we'll use this to be able to get him to the next talk that we have for him. And yeah, without further ado, Professor Pankaj Jalote, please, if you could do a welcome address.
So thanks very much. I'm really just facilitating this event. But just as a background, as he said, so I was the director of the institute, but for the last, my term ended 2018. And I started a new course here called Software Development Using Open Source. Essentially, the older software engineering course, which I used to teach, but I embedded this thing. And that's what got me interested, and I think in the Bangalore session they had, we communicated, and they said, why don't you come and share your experience? So I talked about it. I also revised my software engineering book. It is now also Intro to Software Engineering using open source. And now I've added Gen AI as well to it. So because that's, of course, open source was 4 or 5 years ago. That was it. But 2 years ago, Gen AI came, so that's how it is. And so since then, we've been in touch in my course, some projects, as he mentioned, we passed them on. Rahul was good enough to write them. And so then this happened, and I'm very happy that we can host it here. Delhi is a central place for something like releasing like that. So it's a good place, and so I hope you enjoy the sessions and learn from it. I'm also looking forward to hearing what the report has to say. So once again, welcome and thank you very much for coming.
Professor Rahul, Professor Surya Prakash, and Mr. Venkatesh, we had like to invite you down here so that we could present the report to Professor Pankaj Jalote, and yeah, we'll be able to, and yeah, Ms. Ashi as well. Yeah, so we'll just give you the report, we'll have a short picture, and then there is a presentation of the report.
You just release it because I think it's
No, you should be here.
not likely to be involved in the. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rahul, you should also be. Rahul,
Rahul should also Thank you.
Okay, so very good morning, everyone. I join Rahul in thanking each and everyone who is here for joining us for the discussion today. So we started this project, at least started conceptualizing this project somewhere in January 2024. I still remember January 31st evening I had a coffee with Venkatesh, wherein he mentioned that everyone is using FOSS, but maybe we really don't know what is the economic impact FOSS is making in this particular country. And then as part of the conversation, he tried to remind me that the last time when someone tried to study this area in a comprehensive way was when Professor Rahul Day made a report on FOSS in India in the year 2009, and again it was followed by another report in 2015. So there has been a gap of almost 10 years, and we thought that maybe this is time to actually study in a bit more detail what kind of economic impact FOSS is making, and also what kind of potential reforms are possible to make FOSS adoption more wider. So that's a broader context in which this particular project originated. Of course, Venki, as many of you know, is a highly ambitious person, so he said we need to finish this in 6 months. Of course, now we are in 2025 July, so which means 1.5 years. So it took considerably longer time than what we actually anticipated. But what we would also like to do now is to share with you some of the major insights from our study. And yes, everyone will be able to get access to the full report now itself. You can use a QR code again towards the end of the session. You will be we'll be displaying that QR code so that everyone can download it and then yes, use it for further I would say discussions and developments in this area. As I indicated, the broader idea was this economic impact study, and again I'm emphasizing it for a very specific reason. Whether we manage to do that or not, that's something which we will be discussing, or to what extent we have managed to do that is something which we will be discussing as we proceed. So the specific research questions which we had as part of this particular study within that broader objective was how and to what extent organizations are using FOSS, what benefits, be tangible or be non-tangible benefits they experience by virtue of adopting FOSS, what challenges they face in terms of adoption of FOSS, and what are the factors that drive the choice of the kind of software. And as I indicated earlier, since this particular research was initiated by a law school, we were also very much interested in what are the potential legal and policy measures that can promote the use of FOSS in India. The research methodology which we have used here is a so-called mixed methods framework, wherein we have used both doctrinal research as well as empirical insights. For the empirical insights, what we did was we developed different case studies. So as you will notice, we have done 16 case studies as part of this particular research. The sampling method, of course, in an ideal world, we should have been able to do random sampling, but due to the limitations of time as well as resources, what we have done is purposely sampling. And here I need to also specifically mention what we have done is we have gone to organizations whom we know has adopted FOSS at least in some manner, so that we can also better study what challenges or what benefits they actually incurred in the process. What we also did with respect to this developing of case studies was we did interviews. So rather than sending a summary document, so we had interviews with the key persons who are involved in this particular area. So in many instances it is a chief experience officer or the chief technology officer, but in some instances there were also some other specific persons who were appointed to us by the concerned organization. So we have tried to make the case studies as diverse as possible, and this is done by taking into consideration 4 different sectors. So the 4 different sectors which we have tried to study are the finance sector, the education sector, then the software and IT industry sector, and finally the healthcare sector. We also tried to have some diversity in terms of the type of organization we studied. So we have startups, we have non-profits, we have medium and large enterprises, and we also have some public sector undertakings as part of this study. So on the screen you will see the organizations which we have actually reached out with respect to this particular study, and these are the 2 government organizations, that is NBCA and the Kerala Infrastructure and Technology for Education Guide as a government organizations in this regard. Then we also have a very inspirational story of Vigil. So we have Karkiv and colleagues from Vigil here. Again, I mean, that's a case study which I would strongly encourage all of you to actually read. I love to learn from all of you there. Now, when it comes to the findings, again, I just want to reemphasize that I'm just going to give you a very quick overview. Everyone should ideally read the report, so I'm just going to give you a flavor of what are the major findings. There are both technical as well as business factors in terms of the adoption of the software. So the technical factors which we could identify from the case studies are fulfillment of the specific functional requirements, maintainability of the software component and the system it is integrated into, the potential feasibility of integration, ease of usage, extent of customization possible, and what kind of licensing terms were available with respect to the concerned software. The business factors included the cost effectiveness, no surprise there. Then presence of a community also apparently is playing a very important role in the decision making process. So whether there is a community to support you in terms of how the software would actually work, what kind of like bug fixing and things are required, I think that also is appear to be playing a very important role there. And the extent of use in the industry, at least from our interviews, also appears to be playing an important factor in the decision making. Now, with respect to the benefits, if you look at the existing literature in this particular area, you will generally notice that lower total cost of ownership is one of the very important benefits which is cited in the literature, and of course this is also getting reflected in the many interviews which we did as part of this study. Then of course the potential customization options is also something that was getting reinforced in the interviews. Then improved development velocity resulting from readily available functionality was also something which is reported in the existing literature and which is also getting reinforced in the interviews. Freedom from vendor lock-in and associated costs and enhanced security were also things that were reported very specifically in the literature or found specifically in the literature. But in addition to this, what we could also learn from the interviews is that at least some firms are also seeing this as an opportunity for development of internal technical capacity. One of the very interesting organizations which we could find in this regard is Siroda. So they are actually using this as a tool for improving the internal technical capacity. And there are many others also, I'm just putting it as an example here. Then enhanced visibility and control over the IT systems is also something which we could actually observe from our interviews, which hasn't received much attention in the existing literature in the field. And then the innovation dimension is also something which we could see getting re-emphasized in the different interviews which we conducted as part of this particular study. So these are some of the major benefits which we are actually learning with the help of these sets of 16 case studies in this report. Now, with respect to the challenges also, what we did is the following. So we marked what the existing literature is telling us about the challenges with respect to adoption, and then we are also seeing, whether these challenges are getting mentioned in the interviews which we conducted. So the existing literature will definitely tell you that yes, tracking and applying patches and updates is definitely a challenge. Availability of persons with skills in FOSS technologies is a challenge. In some instances, lack of community support is a challenge. Performing maintenance and support, integration, compatibility with existing IT systems, lack of contributions to FOSS, no revenue model to sustain FOSS projects are things which are mentioned in the existing literature. But interestingly, during the interviews, we didn't see much people mentioning the free riding by competitors or the potential free riding by competitors as a threat. Most probably, these organizations are confident that even if they are releasing the software in public, they don't fear the competitors doing a free riding. Even switching costs didn't find much mention in the interviews, which was kind of a surprise for us. Of course, it could also be possible that we didn't nudge specifically the other side to respond on this. We didn't specifically ask them whether this is a challenge, so that could also be one of the reasons, but we thought that this is worth highlighting here. Now, with respect to IP and licensing also, some of the findings are here. So, there is considerable awareness among organizations regarding the impact of licensing in their usage of FOSS. So as I was also discussing with someone during the tea break which we had now, is one of the major challenges which many organizations face is the uncertainty with regard to what kind of license is being attached with a particular software. So I think that's something which we can see here and also in the existing literature. Then it is the existing literature will definitely tell you that there's a strong preference for using FOSS components with permissive license while avoiding restrictive or viral licenses. Again, this is getting reinforced in the interviews. That's something very visible. And yes, the licensing conditions play a very critical role in the decision making within the organization. But apart from this, during the interviews, we also notice that there is anticipation of a rapid change in the licensing related challenges due to AI-driven code development. So many people are actually reflecting on that dimensions. And then the other thing which we could also observe is that of the organizations which are developed as case studies here, who are released or software as open source, there is kind of a 50-50 split between permissive and restrictive licensing. The other thing which I haven't mentioned here in the slides, but which is also something obvious for a crowd like this, is that even today I think we are mostly on the consuming side rather than on the contributing side. But then as some of the interviews also indicated, maybe this is part of a cycle. Maybe as we move forward, when there is more wider adoption, maybe we will also start contributing more to the pool of free and open source software. So that's something which we expect in the long term. Finally, these are the major recommendations that are coming from this particular study in terms of legal and policy reform. So many of you know that there are already certain guidelines from the central government regarding procurement of software, wherein they say that yes, preference can be given to or should be given to FOSS. But maybe things have also changed a lot in the last couple of years. That is from the time we had the last major set of guidelines in this regard. So maybe it is also time to review them and also modify them to suit the current realities. The second thing which we strongly suggest is that maybe there should be also a committee to review the working of existing guidelines, how many government organizations or governments or the organizations supported by public funding are actually following the existing guidelines in letter and spirit. We also argue for more grants for contributions to FOSS projects, both from the side of the central government as well as from the state governments. And we also cite some interesting examples of industry contributing to extending financial support for FOSS projects. Again, we hope that it will inspire more organizations to also support FOSS projects, because at the end, yes, the government cannot support all the projects, so maybe the industry should also be extending their help in this regard. Then yes, incorporation of FOSS in educational curriculum across the country is also something which is very much due. Some states governments have done that, but how many state governments have done that? That's definitely a question which we might want to ask ourselves. Incentives or framework for contributions from educational and research institutions is also something that needs to be given due weightage, as at least those of you are working with the educational institutions very clearly know. Most of our ranking parameters will give high weightage for the patents file, but I'm not sure how many institutions are actually giving weightage for the contributions made in areas like this. So maybe a relook on these dimensions is also long overdue. FOSS adoption by state governments is also more desirable. Of course, some state governments have done it in some of the core areas, but a lot more can actually be done. Then establishment of open source program office is also something which is very much required. Again, I mean, you will notice that some of the organizations which we have studied as case studies have a proper office which is looking at this dimension. For example, one of the largest banks which we have studied, yes, they do have an open source office, but are many of our government organizations having this? The answer would be in the negative. So maybe there should be an appropriate open source program office. Then increasing the awareness and accessibility of OpenForge as a platform is also very important, because during the interactions with people from the industry, we notice that most of the people are actually not using OpenForge. Maybe again we need more studies on why that's the case, and is there something that can be done. So OpenForge as a platform, maybe there is a lot which we can do. Last but not the least, open sourcing government works is also extremely important. In this regard, we also mentioned the different pathways which we are seeing from different parts of the world, and yes, there are different options, but what is required as a minimum is at least initiating discussions in this particular regard. So these are the core recommendations that are coming from this work, and may now invite Surya to also discuss about the economic quantification dimension. Surya, yes.
Thank you, Karol. So, while thinking about the economic quantification or economic value addition that is done by FOSS, definitely need the costs and the benefits. But what we noticed was that it was extremely hard to get the quantitative magnitudes. And it is, in fact, extremely hard. If you think about the basic consumer theory in economics, you have the cardinal utility stuff where they kind of give as to how much satisfaction you've derived after consuming something, and it is again anything but it can be disputed. Therefore, the cardinal utility theory was out of the market, and you had the ordinarity where you have indifference curves and things of that sort. Which means it might be difficult to say how much are you deriving in terms of benefits or costs, but you can definitely rank, as in if something is better than or worse than something else. So in our study, we can clearly see that in the case studies that we have done, each firm has had a different experience, where they're saying, fine, these were the benefits and these were the challenges that we faced. So yes, and also I think some of the firms have given some numbers, which I think we will discuss as the panels kind of progress. But so we did not kind of have any number from all of the things or something like that. Otherwise, we could have run regressions and got an exact magnitude that is as to what is the magnitude. I mean, what is the impact of FOSS on the economy or something like that. But that is an obvious limitation that we have. So, but I mean, collectively, we can say that there's something which is going to be beneficial, and the recommendations that Arul took us through, if we go ahead with that, I think it will be a lot of benefits coming in the future. And also, when you think about benefits and costs, this is not a static entity. That's something which happens in the current time frame. It very well kind of spills over intertemporally. So again, quantification in terms of, even if you were to take the present value, something like that, it will be kind of complicated. But we do have an indication that this is beneficial and immensely beneficial. So this is what I would say about benefits and costs. And this is the QR that when you will scan, you will get access to the report.
Thank you very much, Professor Arul and Professor Surya Prakash. I just want to take 1 minute to thank all of these organizations for taking part in the study. They've taken out their own personal time, they've coordinated with other teams internally, they've tried putting numbers to what the value of FOSS is for their organizations. In some cases, they've given us number, in some other cases they at least pointed us to alternatives that they would have had to rely on if open source alternatives didn't exist. You might already be familiar with a number of these names, and again, like it was mentioned, all of these are case studies in the report itself, and like it was mentioned in the very beginning, you can see that there's a variety of sizes of these organizations also. I've been in and around the open source community overall for the last 8-9 years, and it's surprising that even today there is still a persistent misunderstanding, especially from a number of corporates, but also again from students as well, where when we try and talk to them about, hey, look, why aren't you picking up an open source technology, or why aren't you picking up a certain language? I think I'll give you my personal experience from my first year on the job. I had picked up Python by that point. I very got locked into the Python programming language, and it was able to get me to a career where I was able to live and breathe the open source ecosystem. And one of the people that I was staying with, I was trying to convince him that please ditch PL SQL. Please stop only worrying about SQL queries and being trying to hyper optimize some of these things. Why aren't you picking up some of these open source technologies? Why don't you become a little bit more of a generalist than solely working on a database specific technology, right? And the answer that he said he gave at that time is still the answer that I keep hearing, which is, I don't know what companies are using these technologies. I don't know what companies are using these open source software. I don't know what companies are doing with these things. I don't know how they're being used. I don't know how many people are being employed to use these sorts of technologies. And it's also understandable, right? It's understandable that they have experience in a certain technology, and it's a significant time and energy investment to expect from people if we just blindly tell them, just pick up this new fancy language or this open source project and your life will be magically different. Those of us who have crossed over the chasm onto the other side, we can see the light. But then if you're not able to talk to people meaningfully and explain to them that, look, here are the quantitative benefits, here are the kind of organizations where you get to use these sorts of things, here is how these things are actually being used, and here is a community that you can go and approach to be able to learn these things. Those are still questions that are getting asked, and these sorts of studies, it's great to have something that we as FOSS United are able to go around and try and dispel some of these myths and misunderstandings that people have. And there's a number of people here from academia, and I hope that we keep doing more of these sorts of work. It's been very inspiring seeing the kind of work that has been coming out of Harvard and the Linux Foundation. I'm forgetting the Yeah, Professor Nagel from Harvard University has been doing a significant amount of work on actually trying to put a dollar value on various different stacks of the open source ecosystem. And I strongly believe that we need to be doing a lot more. Case studies like this make perfect sense, especially to be able to teach two students either from a technical school or even from a business school, right? Because that's the other thing also when we are trying to talk to as technologists. A lot of the times we end up hyper focusing on the technology itself and the sort of things that it is able to do for our organization or the problems that we're trying to solve. But the people above us are worried about the business. Like, they need to keep us employed, so they need to worry about profit and loss. And if we're not able to give them a meaningful understanding of, hey, here is the sort of upfront investment that you need to do, here is the break-even point at a certain point in the future, how many months it will be until we get to that point, etc., etc. They are not going to be convinced, right? And again, like, case studies like these, right, reports like these, make for great resources that you can share up the chain of leadership so that you're able to convince people meaningfully. As technologists, like sometimes we end up again hyper focusing on I'm only going to make the technology arguments, but we as a community also need to be able to pick up the business arguments to be able to convince the rest of the community that hey, look, here is all the benefits that we are getting as a whole. We'll be able to hire easier, we'll be able to retain people, we'll be able to do interesting things, and you'll save money, right? You'll save money, you'll be able to move faster, and so on and so forth. So please do check the study out. Please do pick different parts and pieces and share them with other organizations, either within your own domains, at the size of the or that you're in, or anything and everything in between. We'll hear from Mr. Abhishek Singh. Like I mentioned, Mrs. Abhishek Singh, we wanted to have him here in person, but he has a last minute appointment because of which he's not able to make it here. He has gracefully sent us a recording to be able to again talk about his experience with the open source community and the report as well.
A very good morning to everyone. First and foremost, I would like to express my regrets that I am not able to come here in person. I was very much looking forward to FOSS is such a dear topic, and the whole team has worked so hard on this, and I've gone through the document, the case study which we've done. But there are certain other engagements that I have in Delhi, which is preventing me from coming over. So I thought the next best thing would be to convey my greetings, my wishes in a virtual mode. So I'm sharing this talk with you today. I look forward to learning more from the deliberations which have been done throughout the day. So I will begin by congratulating the National Law School of India University for this timely study on the impact of free and open source software on the nation. The case study approach which is adopted by the National Law School in studying the organizations which are operating open source solutions across the domains of healthcare, education, finance, software and IT services, and the four categories that they have looked in, whether it's the startups, the not-for-profits, or the medium and large organizations, along with the two public sector organizations, gives us light on the issues of with FOSS, or the potential with regard to FOSS, or the challenges with regard to adoption of FOSS in large organizations, especially public organizations, for public services, and in what ways we can take policy incentives for adoption of FOSS. FOSS has been around for a long time. There have been various notions about them. There are some people, there's this big group of people who swear by FOSS, who would want to do everything by using free and open source software. But then there are also the naysayers, the people who doubt about what FOSS can do. And very often the most common misconception about free and open source software is that the number of people think it's free, so instead of realizing that it's freely shareable, freely accessible by all, and with the freedom to share, modify, alter, update, and share. But people start thinking it's free of cost. And the moment they think it's free of cost, then the immediate text then comes in, like there's nobody responsible for it. So if something goes wrong, what happens? So these misconceptions lead to people not having trust in free and open source software, and that leads to very often many government organizations, many private sector organizations not adopting FOSS to the way they should be doing. So, and many of these thoughts, many of these perceptions which have been there, which we have been knowing intuitively for a long time, has kind of come to light even in this study. And there was a time, and still in many cases, what we see, proprietary software is the norm and FOSS is the exception. But what it has happened is that in several sectors, whether it is the operating systems, whether it's the programming languages, whether it's the middleware, machine learning, FOSS has become the norm. In fact, the most sought after topic today is of course artificial intelligence. And there also, if we look at the model, the foundation model, the LLMs that are in vogue, there's always a debate between whether we should go for open source models or whether we should go for proprietary models. And therein also, like there are solutions, there are models, LLMs like Llama, Mistral, which are available in open source format, wherein you can see how the model works. And there are many proponents who say that for AI to be completely understandable, for AI to be completely explainable, they should be open source. But then there is again another school of thought which feels that making open source sometimes adds risk to that. So that debate between proprietary and open source solution continues. What we have seen across the technology stack continues in the age of AI. And again, the similar issues which have been debated since so long ago continues in the field of AI also. And what another aspect that is always seen is with regard to the total cost of ownership. And I'm not really surprised to see that this study also finds that cost savings and lower total cost of ownership are very often seen as benefits of FOSS. The flexibility which FOSS offers to customize the software as per the requirements of organizations has also been kind of given a reason for adoption of FOSS by many. And in the report, what is also shown is that many organizations, almost 1/3 of the organizations, have also seen the need for technical capability, like how it helps in augmenting the technical capability of the team to work with FOSS. Because once you're dealing with FOSS, then you kind of are able to see the code, tweak the code, update it, modify it, make it better, and sometimes it comes with a blessing in disguise, which also helps in improving the internal capacities, the engineering capacity of the teams which are there, and helps in building better solutions. And FOSS, normally what we have seen over a period of time through various platforms, is driven by the collaborative innovation model. It works on building communities around the code sharing of expertise, sharing of knowledge. And compared to if we compare it to the proprietary technology, if we compare to proprietary software, what FOSS has done is democratized access to knowledge and cutting-edge technologies. What has happened is that with FOSS, India has become a big beneficiary of technology development. What we've also seen is that the adoption of India in various digital India projects, e-governance projects, have been like immense. There have been multiple examples wherein solutions have been built on using free and open source softwares. We know about e-codes, we know about DigiLocker, we know about Umang, e-hospital, school management systems, the Bhuvan Geospatial Portal, OpenForge, and many others. The NIC, of which my team is working on, NIC has also deployed FOSS in many state and central government projects which have been built by them. We also have a Center for Development of Open Source Software, which is working for adoption of open source solutions. In fact, one of the biggest edtech platforms that we are running in India, the Diksha platform, is run on the Sunbird platform, which is a free and open source software, and the Indian community has contributed a lot to development of Sunbird architecture. In fact, when I was CEO of Karam Yogi Bharat, there also when we started to build the learning platform, the iGot Karam Yogi platform for government servants, there also we were lucky to get an open source platform again built on Sunbird architecture by a Bangalore-based company. But in all these projects, whether it's Diksha, whether it's iGot Karam Yogi, what I realized was that what we also need to do is to invest in building the capabilities of companies which have expertise in working on a platform like Sunbird. And we realized that since very few companies have that expertise and very few people are available, sometimes it becomes very, very challenging to scale such projects. So again, while at one hand we do advocacy for open source platforms, we also have to ensure there is sufficient capacity within the industry available for working on such projects and providing such services. And if you look at like the adoption of these open source projects by NIC, by state governments, by various government departments, it's not easy to estimate how much money the government has saved by using these softwares. This may run into lots of crores of rupees, but the objective for open source software is not necessarily saving money, but it also contributes to India becoming technologically self-reliant and becoming part of the open source movement globally and contributing to open source projects in multiple ways. The government has been like, as I mentioned, been an enthusiastic adopter of the FOSS and has many FOSS-friendly policies. The government of India has a policy on open source and it prescribes usage of royalty-free open standards. There is a policy on open source in the digital government wherein it says that if all things are equal, we must choose FOSS over proprietary alternatives. We also have a policy on collaborative development of applications that encourages reuse of applications built by the government, like almost the Open Forge platform that is there, which is Government of India's GitHub. We have more than 3,000 projects which have been hosted there, and these policies have been notified way back in 2015, where we're laying the foundations of Digital India, and that has also kind of provided an impetus to adoption of open source platforms. What I've also seen is that there are some states, especially like states like Kerala, Assam, which have been big proponents of open source solutions, which have been like provided a lot of support to implementing open source solutions, and which have benefited greatly in by adoption of open source projects. What we have also seen is that even Ministry of Defense in Government of India and several government departments have also adopted a lot of open source products for their operating systems and for the systems that are used regularly within the government. Code for GovTech launched an initiative last year in which we did we did host 10 of our projects to which students could contribute to. So we have been like working, as I mentioned, on various forums. As I mentioned about Diksha, I mentioned about Karam Yogi, and what we have seen is that these projects have scaled up. Like Karam Yogi has got crores of government users, lakhs of people logging on this platform every day, and in no way building this platform has been impacted because of the use of open source platform. In fact, I must say that open source products that have been deployed in Diksha or Karam Yogi has greatly contributed to the success of this project. And what I also see is that building open source projects, working on open source solutions, in a way builds upon the strength that India has, which is our talent, which is our demographic dividend that we have, the engineering talent that we have, and we have seen that several reports, whether it is the GitHub Software's report, which forecasts that India will have the largest number of developers on GitHub by 2028, which will overtake United States also. In fact, the Stanford AI Index also shows that India contributes almost 20% of the AI projects which are there on GitHub. So we have an inherent advantage in advocating for open source solutions, in advocating for FOSS, and ensuring that it becomes more mainstream, it becomes more commonly used. What I've seen is that in the report that has been launched today, what I've seen is that there are many organizations which kind of openly advocate, lobby, evangelize usage of open source. There is always a strong case of mandating procurement of open source by the government, and there are many who feel that any software which is developed through taxpayer funds should be released as open source. In fact, I remember when we selected Sarvam for developing India's foundation models. Initially, it was not proposed an open source solution, but after great discussions with the Sarvam team, now they have announced that Sarvam solutions will be open source. In fact, Socket, the other company which is developing India's foundation model, has also declared that their solutions will be open source. And we do hope that most of the projects that are funded by the government, they do end up becoming open source. In fact, there have been suggestions for changing the procurement guidelines, making for procurement of FOSS solutions the norm. But again, as I mentioned, we can advocate for that, we can push for that, we can make them norm, make free and open source software easily available on GEM platforms. But what we need to do is also to dispel the apprehensions that people have about free and open source software not being secure, apprehensions about free and open source software, nobody being responsible. We need to address that. We need to build capacity for supporting open source solutions, and then I'm sure there will be more and more takers for open source solution, as it's been time and again proved that the total cost of ownership of free and open source software is much lesser compared to that for proprietary software. I would also like to, well, in fact, what I also like to mention is that in the report, there is a case study for organization like Tech for Good that is also leveraging free and open source software to provide low-cost IT solutions to not-for-profit organizations. And actually, one would think that organizations which are doing charitable work, which are funded by philanthropic organizations, why should they not leverage open source solutions? That will reduce their cost, that will ensure that they're able to build better, more secure solutions. The report also recommends use of FOSS for ICT in education. There are instances of Government of Kerala which mandated free and open source software, and seems they saved almost 3,000 crores by use of this. And it's a case example that many state governments should look at this case study and think of, can they also do that? I would also like to mention that our Honorable Prime Minister has been advocating for use of open source solutions, and in fact we were chairing the AI Action Summit at Paris, and wherein the Honorable Prime Minister made it very clear in his address that AI models should be built on an open source framework, and that would ensure accessibility for all and for fostering public trust. AI Mission is also working with various institutions like IIT Jodhpur and other academic institutions, wherein we are working for building open source AI technologies. And I'm sure that more and more awareness about open source solutions, adopting it, deploying it at scale, ultimately AI will become a part of almost the use of open source in digital technologies, use of open source in artificial intelligence will become the norm rather than the exception. And I must say there is a lot of support today for FOSS. In fact, last year before I was with Venki of FOSS United, and I was there at a FOSS event in Bangalore, and I was amazed to see the energy there. There were 11-year-olds who were contributing to FOSS platforms, collaborating with developers from across the world on various platforms, sharing code, sharing knowledge, contributing to that. And if we work together, there's an ample opportunity of developing a strong ecosystem of FOSS developers in India. FOSS can help us become Atmanirbhar in the field of software development. It can play a huge role in making India the go-to place for developing open source solutions. We need to work together. We need to work with our developers. We need to work with the startups. We need to work with the researchers. We do need to work out for open source champions. And while doing so, while adopting FOSS in government, there will be challenges that will come in the way. But I am sure working together, we will be able to build a very strong network of FOSS developers, and we'll be able to build numerous opportunities for those who are championing FOSS as also using them in various government of India projects. I wish the very best of the deliberations today, and hope to get the feedback with regard to what all has been shared today, and work out the action plan for adoption of FOSS in India. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Mr. Abhishek Singh for delivering that very generous note on the use of FOSS in India and the report. A few things I'd like to call out. People from Tech for Good are here, who the Mr. mentioned. They and a lot of other organizations are doing very interesting work on bringing FOSS to the not-for-profit sectors, which are again like fundamentally cash-strapped, right? Karki from Biglar, which was mentioned, which Professor Karol gave a shout out to, is also there. The second thing I want to call out is 3,000 crores. 3,000 crores is what the state of Kerala saved by adopting open source software, right? So we're not talking about a few lakhs, we're not talking about a few crores, we're not even talking about tens of crores. Like these are substantial numbers that we're talking about. And the more we read and the more we understand, the more these sorts of numbers keep coming out. And again, people in the know-how are nodding along because they know and they've seen these numbers. Whereas I don't understand how many people know the kind of impact that these things have, right? One other thing, a little bit of self-promotion. Professor Pankaj mentioned it in his note, Mr. Abhishek mentioned it. Both of them talked about the India FOSS event that happens in Bangalore. This is our annual conference by the FOSS United community, and yeah, it will be a good weekend where you'll get to know about open source work that is happening in India. So yeah, we aren't accepting proposals anymore, sadly. So if you would have loved to speak, I think we'll have to hear you next year. But yeah, we'd love to see you at the event. And without further ado, we'll jump to the next event, which is a panel discussion. I'd love to invite Mr. Parminder, Mr. Jayjit, and Ms. Renuka onto the dais, and Mr. Venkatesh will be moderating the panel. We'll be talking about the strategic importance of FOSS in India. Like Mr. Abhishek also mentioned, FOSS has been around for a long time, and even within the government of India, we've been like using it and adjacent to it for close to 20 years. And we want to understand, hey, look, there have also been a number of policy recommendations that are being made, right? A number of policy recommendations that are being made in the report on how the existing policy landscape could be improved or matured to ensure that we get greater adoption. And those are the things that we will talk about. I'll just do a brief introduction of Mr. Venkatesh, and then I'll let him introduce the rest of the panel. Roughly 3 years back, I came across a post on the FOSS United forum saying that they are giving a scholarship for people, for technologists and specifically people in the open source community to pursue a course to understand technology policy. Right? The Takshashila institution in Bangalore has a 3-month-long weekend course where they give you a brief introduction to technology policy, and FOSS United was giving a scholarship to people to be able to pursue it. I ended up applying for it on a whim, and I thought, okay, fine, let's see how this goes. I got accepted, I got that scholarship, I ended up pursuing the course, and I eventually ran into Mr. Venkatesh. And that was what set me on a path here to where I am now, working with the FOSS United Foundation full-time and being full-time engaged in some of these things. Later on, I get to know that Venkatesh is the one who actually ended up approving my scholarship. I'm not sure what exactly he saw in that application. So on the good days, I say that I thank him for bringing me into this. On the bad days, I blame him for dragging me into this ecosystem. So yeah, without further ado, please.
You're also on the panel, so come
Yes.
over. Am I audible?
When he was inviting, I thought there was something missing.
Sorry, what?
When he was inviting people, I thought there was something missing. I couldn't figure that out. He's on the panel.
Am I audible?
Use the mic.
Yes, sir. Hello. I'll start by thanking. That should wake everybody up. Is it?
Yeah.
Beyond. Yeah, hi. Thanks everyone for being here. I would like to start by thanking Abhishek Singh sir for the address that he gave. He was to be here, but he had a meeting with in the Ministry of IT, and with the rains, etc., it's quite a challenge. So yesterday he burned the midnight oil and sent us the report, the video just after midnight. It's really long day. And then he sent me a reminder saying that I've sent you the report, the video at 5:30 in the morning. So yeah, and I'd like to really thank the panelists here. I've known all of them for a really long period of time, so I'm going to just give brief introductions and then jump straight into the panel. Renuka is an economist. She is the managing director of TrustBridge, which is a think tank based in Delhi. Jayjeet has been in industry, working with HP, Sun, and many other organizations. He was a partner at KPMG, and he is now president of the Center for Digital Economy and Policy. Jayjeet and I worked together on some extremely pitched battles around open standards. Maybe if you have the time, we'll go into that. Rahul is the CEO of FOSS United. He's a software developer who ended up taking up a management role. Rahul has worked on several scientific software, including some which are some software open source packages which are part of the Mars rover, which is, I think quite a rare distinction. Parminder is, it's very hard to describe him, but he has been a fighter for digital rights. He was the founder of IT for Change, which is a leading NGO based in Bangalore. He has been part of several UN committees on digitization of the economy. So with that, let me quickly jump into the topic today and also give a quick brief on why we did this report. In 2009, Professor Rahul did a study on the impact of open source. That study found that India can save about $1 billion if we went with open source. In 2009 was a really long time ago, almost 16 years ago. In 2015, Professor again did a study which was funded by the International Center for Free and Open Source Software based in Kerala. In that study, they did a bunch of case studies. They did not work on quantifying the economic impact. We felt that because so much time has elapsed, and if you look at 2009, at that point in time, open source was the exception. Proprietary software was the norm. Windows, Unix, etc., were the dominant operating systems. But if in the last 15 years, open source has pretty much become the norm, and proprietary software has become the exception. If you look at, say, software as a service, all the underlying infrastructure is open source. It's just the customer-facing interface, which is a thin layer on top of open source, which is the proprietary layer. So we felt that open source has succeeded in many ways, but the success story is not very visible, and therefore we reached out to Kailash Nath, who's the CTO of Zerodha, and he was generous enough to give us a grant, and Professor Arul was happy to take it forward. I think Professor Rahul, we couldn't take it up at that point in time. So Professor Arul and Professor Suri Prakash took it up. So I think we're very happy with the way the report has come out, because we really tried hard to surface what is the current state of affairs with open source. And in today's talk, what we try to do is, we try to do maybe a two-part thing where we look at where open source has succeeded, where it needs to go further. And I'll start with you, Renuka. We are currently in a fairly complex geopolitical environment. And one of the arguments that is thrown out in favor of open source is that it helps countries like India protect their strategic autonomy. You're part of global value chains, while at the same time you have control over the source code. So as an economist, how do you look at all the trade wars that are happening, the Trump tariffs, and the role of FOSS situated within that kind of an ecosystem?
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I'm audible, right? Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Venki. First, as an economist, it makes me very sad to see all the trade wars happening and to see us regress from a more, global WTO-led standard into bilateral FTAs or group FTAs that the world is going towards. So I think that this is not a good thing, but that's not what we are here to talk about, right? We can do separate conferences just to cry over what's going on. But given that this is the world reality, I feel that FOSS is actually the one thing that is going right in the world. That despite whatever we talk about trade wars and embargoes and tariff and non-tariff barriers, the one area that is still untouched so far is that of FOSS. And so that's sort of the only one place left for us to go.
Should we use the other mic? Or
Is the mic on? Use this.
And
No, I think mics talk to each other.
And so, as India and as other emerging economies, what are the 2 or 3 things that we would worry about in a tariffs world, right? One is tariff barriers, one is non-tariff barriers, and
Hold it closer.
I don't think this is. So both. Sorry about that.
I think it's using proprietary software.
Both tariff and non-tariff barriers are. So one is tariff and non-tariff barriers, and I think that's where not being locked into proprietary software is extremely important for countries like India. We've also seen instances of other countries being kicked out of proprietary software platforms. And at that point, that is also important from a strategic viewpoint, because then we are not locked into any specific platform, any specific country's platform, and should our foreign policy go so wrong that we get kicked out of proprietary platforms, we have the ability then to get different hardware sources and keep our ship going. So I think that this is the one place where we are still, there is some light, because this is not part of any of the trade discussions, and we need to keep it that way.
Thanks, Renuka. I think what you said reminds me of the fact that I think the Biden administration put some restrictions on the H1000 chips. So what that means is that if we want to train our models, etc., we are a very restricted supply of processors. And it's not the first time that India has been at the receiving end of sanctions. I think in the 70s, if I remember correctly, US mainframes we were not allowed to import that. And therefore we had to leverage client-server technologies rather than mainframes, which in the end turned out to be good for us, because that's where eventually the entire world go to. Let me come to Jayjeet. Jayjeet, you work with a number of policymakers. You work with them on a range of issues, not just IT. But you have been in the open source community for a very long time. And you're from IIT Kanpur, which is a bastion of open source. What have you seen in terms of where we have come in the last 15 years, and maybe in the second round we can kind of look at where do we need to go from here. But in terms of FOSS in education, FOSS in the curriculum, FOSS adoption in government, what is your observation?
So, we have come such a long way that I don't even know where to start from. Our primary battle was not just standard, which is what Vicky was talking about, because that was a global war in that sense. That standard was a global war. So do keep in mind that FOSS is not just FOSS, but along with it is the issues of IPR, issues of patents, issue of trade regimes. They're intermingled. Which is why I coined the term digital colonization, and after that technological sovereignty and digital sovereignty, because these were tools being used to extract undue economic benefits. And therefore the rules change very simply, because they need to continue to have that undue economic benefit being extracted. And FOSS was one leg of that. What are the changes? That proprietary softwares were being built into our education system, right? So what is the complaints that we heard? When we went to the industry and we said, why are you not moving into open source? It's cheap, it's free, right? And you can just support it in-house. It does not make sense. An MSME is trying continuously, I don't have funds, but is paying lakhs of rupees for software. Why aren't you switching? Because it is more expensive for me to get somebody from the market who knows open source and train that person. So the cost for me is more. That was the persistent excuse we heard. So we said, fine, makes sense, because at the end of the day, you are the company and you're responsible for the bottom line. So let's go and change it from the source of where the problem is, which is the education system. So we went and checked with the education system, and the parents came back and said, please don't push in this open source, because the world wants proprietary software. To be more blunt about it, people are asking for Microsoft. If my child does not know Microsoft, they'll not get a job. They'll not become a secretary or any other salesperson or anything that they're looking for. So please don't mess up with their education. So you see, there was a trap that was laid between the education system, the job system, and the government regime not being able to interfere. And that's where the sovereignty part starts coming in, because it compromises the ability of the government to have its writ on specific issues. So therefore, we still went back to the education and we hammered over there, saying that, look, on what basis are you choosing one single company's software? And we put the knife in, if I can use that allegory, because we said, look, every time you're paying for this software, who is it going to? It's going to Microsoft, it's going to Oracle, it's going to the proprietary softwares, which are largely based in US. Who are they paying the taxes to? To the US government. What is the US government doing with those taxes? At that point in time, they were merely bombing Iraq. So when you are paying for the proprietary software, you are also paying for the bombing in Iraq. Keep that in mind. Now, obviously, if you extend that conversation today, it will be a bombing on Gaza. So whatever you're doing, keep in mind what is the implication. And at the end of the day, a child is walking 10 kilometers to save, in those days, 2 rupees on the bus fare in order to go to the school. And then you're telling them that, look, you must use proprietary software and you must pay for it, right? And you must pay 8,000 rupees. In those days, it was 8,000 rupees for those proprietary softwares. But you will save, you'll have to walk 10 rupees to save 10 kilometers to save 2 rupees. And then the arguments would come in, and these were workshops we had at IIT, where the journalists would stand up and say, but what's your problem in life? Everything is available in every place for free or for 10 rupees, so what's your problem? Well, my problem is that are we teaching our children that to steal is okay, right? And it is almost like saying that you are sitting on Gangotri, you're getting free, clean, best water possible, highest quality, and you say, no, I want bottled water in a plastic, which is not allowed in this campus. Right? And you're saying that's what I want, and so I want packaged software in a proprietary sense. So it took a lot of time to make that change, and I'm so happy to see that that change has happened. So we now have open source being the primary teaching material in the schools. Unfortunately, we don't see that in the colleges unless it's an IIT or a triple IT. But in most of the colleges, we are still seeing proprietary software being used. Now, where does the impact come in? I remember in those days I had this deck saying, what's the difference between what's common between Facebook and Google and a bunch of other companies. And what was common was that not only were they American, they were based in California. And why is that? It's because of the education system that they have been promoting, where they allow you to use, they teach you in open source. Imagine if Google went off an Oracle database. They would have been bankrupt in the second year itself, right? So unless they switched to open source, they could not have scalable systems in place. So by not teaching our kids open source, we are handicapping them. They can never build scalable large systems because they're not comfortable with it, right? Now, I'll fast forward many other things that has happened, many other places where open source has come in, and as Venki was saying, it's now business as usual. You don't need to break your head on it, you don't need to fight on it. There will be some niggling issues where people who are not comfortable with open source because they never got exposed to it, and they will raise issues like, what about security? What about this? What about that? Now those are issues that are there in every other entity. How did the cyber bombing of the Iranian centrifuge happen? Did it happen through open source software? No. How did you find 8 backdoors to a proprietary software? The company colluded. So which is more safe? I mean, take your call. There is a history of situations. So by saying that security is the issue for which we will not use open source, I think it does not really show too much of, if I can say, cleverness about it. The current argument that we see is that, look, once everything is in the cloud, you're paying for the cloud. You're really not paying for the proprietary software. So again, how does it matter? If you're using open source, you'll put in the cloud, you'll pay for the cloud. So it's really a cloud issue, right? So there is no financial implications. Does it make sense? Are you okay with that? Why are we not okay with that? Because it's not an issue of money. I remember in those days we used to have this argument that open source, that free software is free as in freedom and not free as in beer. We're not talking about free on our pockets because somebody has to work on it, right? There has to be a salary that needs to be paid. It is free for freedom. If I need to make changes, and in those days I used to take the example of Metis script being supported, and Microsoft had said no to it because it was too small a market. And there was an Indian professor based in Australia who was determining what was the Unicode for the Metis script, and it was not getting supported in the Office productivity suite. And we said, unless you got open source, you cannot add the script to it, and you have to prostrate yourself in front of large companies and beg to them for the change to happen. So open source is not about costing, and it is about costing also because we save 3,000 crores. In fact, 2007, I worked with government of Gujarat on the treasury system, and we saved 128 crores, which was humongous amount of money in 2007. So it is also about cost, but primarily the first issue is about freedom, to get access to technology, to be able to harness it. That's the freedom that we want. So I'll stop here, otherwise it will take.
I think good points. Good points, Jayjit. And what you said resonates because I spoke to a bunch of country leaders who are implementing identity systems. And the two things that really stuck out in the conversations was they were going with open source software because they wanted, digital sovereignty, full control over the infrastructure. Once you build an identity system, it's critical national infrastructure. They did not want any foreign entity to have control over that or to be able to even see that. In fact, just recently Sri Lanka has come out with a RFP for the ID system. And India is funding that, and the way they've broken up the RFP is interesting. So an Indian organization will build it for them. But once the enrollment starts, at that point it will be taken over by a Sri Lankan organization. So in speaking to the folks in Sri Lanka and Togo and other places, digital sovereignty came out as a big thing. The second thing that many of them told me is that avoiding vendor lock-in is really important, because they found that with proprietary software, if they wanted to make even a simple change, the vendors would ask them $50,000, $150,000. So I think these two are really critical issues. It's good to see the progress that open source is making in education. I think that's something that we fought for a very, very long time.
Yeah, I think you hinted on a very important point also, is that India was never there in the map in terms of creating and leading open source communities. And I think MOSIP is the one big change that has happened. And I think we should all pat ourselves at the back for that change, where we are providing software not just for people and for students, but entire governments. And that's a humongous change that has happened.
Let me move to Rahul. It's been 1.5 years since you became CEO of FOSS United, 1 year. And I think many of us in the open source community have wanted to see an organization that organizes the FOSS community across India, and we were happy when we saw FOSS United being set up, again with thanks to the support from organizations like Frappe and Zerodha and others. So in this last 1 year, what have been your observations as to where are we with open source? In the second round, we come to what further needs to be done.
So it's been a very interesting year. Something that Professor Arul mentioned in the beginning was there's still a very significant perception that we are a country that is more or less consuming. But when you start sort of digging really deep and going into these small communities, you start realizing that there is a significant creator community as well. But the thing also is these are happening in so many silos, and each of those people is sort of happy staying within their own silos because they're able to find the users that they need from those silos. And the other thing also is this is one of the policy recommendations as well, right? It's become a question about incentives, because this is something that I've kept coming across it over the last 1 year. There being a lack of incentives to support creation of open source, or there being a direct negative incentive saying, don't make this into an open source thing, make this into a closed source proprietary thing, we'll give you VC funding or whatever, and then we can go and make a lot of money. So that has been my experience, and especially recently we put out a project called Forklore. Forking is the open source term for copying and cloning an open source project, right? And we put together this a repository of 40 plus maintainers and open source creators from India, right? People who are building across domains, all different kinds of sizes of projects and everything and anything in between. And I think one fundamental thing that we are realizing is there's a lot of work that is needed to be able to surface some of these projects, but there's a really beautiful and vibrant community that exists already. I'll just end with one small quote. So I was at the Vischitra conference 2 weeks back in Bangalore. It happened 2 weeks back on Friday. And halfway through the day, there was a professor from IIT Bombay who was talking about public health. he was talking about conception and when, what sort of factors influence conception and human birth, right? And I started looking him up and I realized the fact that he created 2 open source projects, professor from IIT Bombay. As far as I know, there's no incentive, like again Professor Arun mentioned, right? Like what is the incentive for a professor to put out an open source project when they could have just spent that time putting one more paper together, guiding one more PhD student together, right? But no, he put out these 2 open source packages, very specific for the domain that he works in. But it's still our responsibility as the open source community to say, no, you know what, we find projects from anywhere and everywhere in the country and we want to try and put a spotlight on these things. Even if we directly can't make use of it, we still want to acknowledge the fact that this work is happening and hopefully give people better role models to look up to as well. Right? Like only if we are able to see, hey, look, somebody who looks like me, who talks like me, is actually going and creating open source, will there be a bit more of an impetus for us also to say, hey, yeah, you know what, maybe I can also go and do this. This is not something that is reserved for a certain set of people, a certain educated pedigree or whatever.
And I think you should also talk very briefly about the way the community is growing thanks to the work that FOSS United is doing. Also the annual event, very briefly.
Yeah. Again, India FOSS is something that like we are very proud of at this point. We are able to bring together a very diverse group of people who again are working at the very grassroots level, who are talking about some of the fundamental influence that they are able to have on how open source is growing within those pockets. And one of the things that we are very proud of, especially over the last couple of years, this has been happening before me and this will continue happening after I leave the foundation. But we are not trying to be the catch-all open source ecosystem. Like what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, look, you know what, we want to participate in all the other existing open source ecosystems and see how we can support these ecosystems. In Delhi, there's a very active contributor to OpenStreetMapping. Has anybody here uses OpenStreetMapping? Everyone here uses Google Maps, right? Okay, one person said yes.
No, we use it in our debates.
So OpenStreetMapping is an open source alternative to Google Maps, and I don't know how many people have gotten like points on Google Maps for like putting a location, giving a review, it'll keep like doing it, right? Why are you contributing to something which isn't actually helping the commons? OpenStreetMap is a place where you can go, you can put those locations on the map, you can like add reviews to those things and contribute to the commons overall. And we're able to support people like them who are again doing meaningful work on the ground in the digital commons. And that is something that we've been very proud of over the last 1 year.
You're talking of the FOSS grants program.
Yeah, the FOSS grants program, where we're able
How
to
much money do you give out for that?
This year the budget is about 25 lakhs. We've given out grants ranging from anywhere 30,000 rupees to up to 1-ish lakh per month, up to like 10 lakhs per annum sort of a thing. It's not a lot of money, but there are definitely people who want to build organizations and open source projects, and this is at least sufficient for them to say, hey, look, this is a question of whether I create this or not, but then through that grant they're at least able to get to, okay, this is now created, now it's a question of how do I get more people to come to it, is this alive enough that people are able to make use of this meaningfully.
Yeah, and I want to say that FOSS United has supported some of these projects at very crucial times. For example, there's this software called Bruno, and this developer wanted a little bit of money to sustain himself, and thanks to that support, he's now able to kind of get a leg up and move forward.
They are now back at India FOSS this year as a financial sponsor. Because they're like, look, just take the money, like, we don't want anything else from you. Sure, there's a lot of other things that we can get. But that's also something that we realized that we are playing a very long game. We're playing a really, really long game where to some extent it's like a VC thing, right? Like you make 100 bets and you hope that one of those really, really goes big. And I think to some extent we're also hoping that, you know what, we'll support 100 different individuals in the project that they're building. And we know that at least a few of them will like, go good. Whether or not they give back to us is an entirely different question. But we know that at least a few of them have the pedigree to be able to build really meaningful, sustainable, big picture open source projects.
Yeah, and since Karki and team are here, I want to add that the Villipuram Blue Linux user group has been doing absolutely amazing work in teaching underprivileged children the computer science using FOSS. They've done courses on Flutter, on Python, etc. And the kind of work that they have done in terms of growing the FOSS community in Villipuram has been absolutely phenomenal. FOSS United is one of the supporters. So yeah, thank you. So let me come to Parminder. Like Jayji, Parminder is also one of those old, let's say, open source jihadis. Parminder and I worked together on when there are a lot of challenges around the MNCs trying to push in software patenting in India. So since 2008, we have been, collaborating and fighting on that. And Parminder has basically been someone who's a champion for digital rights, and one of the lenses with which he looks at open source is basically the rebalancing of power equations. And I think at this particular point in history, that issue of rebalancing the power equations between the proprietary software vendors, emerging economies, etc., is really critical, because what we see is organizations like OpenAI, etc., throwing massive amounts of money at the problem. We in India don't have that kind of money, so therefore we have to look at open source AI models. I think Meta is saying that we'll hire people for $100 million, and I think I saw a picture where a whole bunch of folks from Meta have been hired, from OpenAI have been hired out, and at crazy salaries. Apparently Google is paying AI researchers to sit at home, and they have a clause saying that they cannot join OpenAI. So this is the kind of money power that is being thrown around. We heard that $500 billion Stargate program. Nvidia has hit $4 billion in market cap. So in that kind of a scenario, open source is one of the most powerful forces that helps a country like India still have control over technologies like OpenAI. So in the last 10 years, 15 years, how have you seen this battle play out, and where do you situate open source within the global battle lines that are being drawn?
Thank you, Venki. Since we are here at the release of this report, I'll start with this report. I think, and I thought about it, and I think in strategic terms. And I thought this report is the best thing one could do. If you have to practically do something about open source software, if a single thing has to be done, then that report is the best one, because as in the introductions I was saying and others were saying, that it's basically people know it, but policymakers want somewhere written, authoritatively that this is happening, and they can show it to somebody else, and not just your presentations and your meetings. And they did do it systematically, and they have all kind of players, private and NCPI and all that, and then you really feel, and it's bureaucrat is what a bureaucrat is, that I can then do something. Now comes to my session. And that session I read in the morning and said it's about strategic issues of strategic importance. Now the problem is I don't know the meaning of this word strategic. I do not think anyone really actually knows the meaning of the word strategic. I mean, a lot of people sitting here, do you know what strategic is?
Actually, I went and searched it, and it says these are issues of, where is it? Yeah. As relating to the most important general aspects of something, especially when they decided in advance. I was no wiser at all, but good that Venki gave me a quiz that talks about power disbalances, and I thought that at least is pretty strategic. So, so basically strategic word normally, if I can make a joke, is used by people to put down the next person that I'm wiser than you, and I'm talking about issues, and you're just simple, practical-minded person who really do not know the wiser things in the world. That's generally how, in normal talk, the word strategic is used. But let me try to give some formal shape to what I'm trying to say. So in a couple of ways, I'll come to the thing, but again, we are in a power balance problem. US has nowhere stopped bombing using Indian money at all by any means. They're using more of Indian money to do more bombing right now. Whatever may have happened with open source community or not. And Indians have not stopped contributing to the US wealth by peace. And peace, nothing has changed. Things have gone worse. This is the balance of power issues. I just took it from some people who have already spoken. Anyway, so when I thought about strategic, I think one strategic word generally in policy. Internally, it's thought of as security. Externally, it is thought of as geopolitics. And quickly,
probably you guys know what happened in Operation Sindoor. War has become platformized. Now it's not the aircraft or a gun, but a platform which is warring. Right? Earlier they were interconnected. Now they are appendages of a platform. And there's a big shift between appendage of a platform and things being networked. Right? So, and we realized that this was one of the few first wars or skirmishes which were platformized. And India hit not a wrong move. The other parties started with a gambit they were not expecting that happens in chess. Point is quite quickly. So, as you may have perhaps heard, that India perhaps lost perhaps 2 or 3 planes initially. It seems what happened was that battle doctrine was closer to closer air-to-air war, and Pakistan decided a 180-kilometer hit, plane to plane, which was, I think, the longest hit in aviation history ever. Now that doctrine was different. India was prepared in a different mindset, and they did something else. But that's not a problem, because that would happen as you go to chess, you think the moves of your opponent, the guy opens with a very different gambit, and then you. But what happened in India was India just dropped all operations more or less on that time for 2 days and readjusted. Quickly came back, and then things are okay. Now that's possible because you reconfigure things. So you have to reconfigure your weapon system, your radar systems. Different radars work differently in short range, long range, different planes, different armaments. Everything needs to get rearranged in 40 radars. That's possible if you possibly have an open source platform where you can rearrange things. Rafale, by the way, does not share this property thing. And India has been in a big rethink since to probably go for the SQ systems of Russia, even if the plane may be not that good, because it is ready to share its thing. And actually, India thinks that its radars are better than the Russian radars, and therefore they want to integrate their radars with your plane, and please give us software. So this is like strategic as strategic can be. There are other strategies. The last one I'll say, the other ones, because soon he will be looking at me in a certain manner. One I will speak, and then the rest, I think there are 4 or 5 others. Second, people miss. One of the biggest strategic imperatives is in a society where everything is softwareized, the regulation can't reach things. And for regulation to reach things, it needs to be able to view things. And to be able to view things, the things have to be open source. Now, if you have heard of a WTO and FTAs, there's a big fight. The fight generally comes from this. The logic used by developing countries is we need regulatory access to software. That is a big issue. You have heard about 10 years back the Volvo case, right? When Volvo was cheating on their pollution software. And this was an old thing in a very, very primitive phase of digital society. So governments are clear, we need access to software, and that's why software is to be open source. Now, India conceded the point on access to software with UK, saying that we don't need access to software, which is a very dangerous point. And the problem with the negotiators is that in trade talks, normally people think I can do an arrangement with Australia, which I will deny to Cameroon. No, that happens with apples or walnuts. You can say I'll take walnuts from here and not apples from there. That doesn't work in digital things. In the digital thing, you have to decide architecture. I'm for this architecture or not for this architecture. You can't do piecemeal arrangements, and India has done it. Now they find it difficult to not do that with the US, and when you do it with US, more money, Indian money goes to use what he said into US more bombings. Anyway, so then what the foreigners at the FTA guy says, no, you are using the security and regulatory excuse, but you are trying to use access to open source software for an economic advantage. You are trying, because you are laggard in digital industrialization, and we are ahead, you are trying to steal our things and use them for your own purposes. Yes, we are trying to do that. Everybody who is a laggard in economic race uses these kind of open licenses. US did it with Europe in the 18th, 19th century. So the third case is for digital industrialization. We need it. There are 3 more cases about what strategic aspects of this thing I see, but I would return the mic now.
I think that's a paper for your new think tank to write.
Well, I change my views by tomorrow.
So let me just do a quick fire round with all the panelists. I think I see that we are running behind time. But if you had a wish list for the next 10 years of the open source community in India, what would that be?
Before I come to the community, I do want to put out one word of caution on where is it that we are not doing so well. And I think I'll raise 2 points here. One is that when it comes, open source as a bulwark against big corporations, we all buy and there is no argument. But open source as a bulwark against big government is something that needs a far more open discussion in our circles. Let me give 2 examples. Well, 2 examples in which I think government itself needs to do a little bit more than it is doing on open source. One is they have an open source procurement policy in theory, but in practice, when their tenders come out, they themselves ask for proprietary software. Now you have to think back and say what are the incentives that is making the government do so, and perhaps it is that easy to attribute blame and it's public choice theory playing out, saying I'm protecting myself by making sure that I have somebody else to blame. Whatever the reason is, I think that's one area that we need to rethink. The second is, we're all quite proud of our DPI story, but I would question whether the DPI as it currently stands in India is open source at all or not. Sure, it's built using open source components, but I don't think that it is open source in the true sense of the term. And we really need to have more honest and open discussions about how our DPI architecture is framed, who actually has the power. We all talk about balance of power vis-a-vis foreign countries, but there is a problem of balance of power between our users and our state. And I think this is something that just gets glossed over in the glory of the DPI story, but I think this is a sore, it really sticks out. And to my mind, DPIs in India are not open source. They just use some open source components, and we need to push for a lot more, a change in the architecture of many of these DPIs. If we really truly care about things being open and things being open source. And the third point that I want to make on what I think is not going great, there was a statistic somebody mentioned about the number of people on the GitHub platform and the number of commits going out from India. I think that number is not as big as we think it is. A lot of them apparently, and I don't know the exact numbers, but these are anecdotes that I hear, that these are simple engineering projects and that people are just doing this to show something on their CV, but actual meaningful participation by the Indians to global projects is actually very, very limited. And again, I think there needs to be an honest reckoning of where we stand and where we need to go further. So I'm not saying that these are all showstoppers, but until we do an honest reckoning of what is not going right, I don't think that we are going to move ahead.
So I think you've put some pins in the map to, for the next research project.
So, if you look at software, it's got 3 legs, and one is services. You can't do software without services. The second is in terms of data. You can't have any software running without data. And the third part is the regulatory environment. I'm not going to any much deeper in it, but I'll take one example in the interest of time. So when I say, let's say services, why is open source important for us? Because we are the services capital of the world. As long as we push open source globally, including MOSIP, which is the open source version of Aadhaar. Aadhaar clearly is not open source as declared by the government themselves, but MOSIP is, and we have made that open source the rest of the world. We can sell services on top of it. So that's one using Parvinder's word, strategic viewpoint on open source. Second, when we talk about data, we all know what we do with data, right? And we can build AI on top of it and so on and so forth. So we need to have a viewpoint on data also. Just having a viewpoint on software is not good enough. And there are many more aspects. In the interest of time, I'm not going into the details, but just leaving the thought behind. And the last point on regulation, we have a DPDP Act, right? We're all familiar with what the DPDP Act is. And it says you cannot have, save data and you cannot do this and that with PII. But have you seen into the software as to what it is doing? You can't. So DPDP in a way drives a larger adoption of open source because that leads to public scrutiny, that leads to audit, and that ensures that you are actually following DPDP or not. And therefore these 3 aspects of open source software is also quite critical to look at.
just a quick this. I've been speaking to some of the folks working on open source AI, and they are, actually thinking quite deeply about the data part. Because they have used community volunteer effort to collect the data, and they want to ensure that, if some LLM is using that data, they are also giving back to the community. So I think SFLC is working on a share and share alike license for data, which would be, hopefully in the next few months, it should be out soon for comments and reviews. But I think data is definitely, I think the power seems to be shifting from just the software to now software plus data and the systems you build around that.
Can I just add to that is that the challenge, these are great initiatives, right? But the challenge is that the world is moving at an ever accelerating pace. And we've been saying that theoretically earlier, but now we see that happening. Between a Jan and a June, the kind of models that have evolved is exponentially better. And the reason I'm pointing that out is that they are able to do it, including DeepSeek, is because they've got access, they have existing access to large amounts of data. Whereas we see Bhashi doing fantastic work but struggling with data. And that's it, because that's community sourced also.
Rahul?
Yeah, sorry, there might be one person from SFLC here.
Yes. 3.
Yeah, okay, a few people from SFLC. SFLC, for those of you who don't know, is Software Freedom Law Center India. They're coincidentally doing a DPI week this week. And yeah, please go back and watch some of the recordings that they have on their YouTube. It's been a very interesting week of conversations, both from people on the digital rights space and from technologists trying to talk about, including me, so please go watch this video. But again, it's been very interesting to hear like a number of different perspectives on, are these things actually open source? Are these things being built publicly together and so on? But coming back to open source, right? A lot of for-profit software, whether that is closed source or open source, usually has the resources to be able to do marketing. And as part of that marketing, they will go and they will find the people who are using it, and then they put all these logos on their website saying, hey, look, all of these people use our software. Usually closed source, definitely for-profit. Open source cannot do that. Open source is usually one person who's trying to hack on a project by themselves. So over the next decade, I really hope that all of us publicly acknowledge the software that we are using, especially when it is open source. Because that is the very first step. A lot of people, when they hear, oh, how do I give back to the open source ecosystem, they think, oh, I have to start coding, oh, I can't code, I can't do anything. Or, okay, if I can't code, the only other thing I can do is I can give them money. No. The very first step is acknowledge the use of open source software wherever you're using it. And then we can move on to, hey, we are beginning to realize that all of these people are using it. Now let's see if we can do more case studies on how are these specific organizations using it, how are these being used in this sector, and then once there's a significant amount of mass, we can start talking about, okay, now let's look at the value that these things are providing, right? But all of it starts with acknowledgement. So I really hope that you can go back and you can ask your organization, look, let's put together a very simple catalog of this. These are the open source things that we're doing, that we're using, and that's it. Just put that list out. And everything then starts from there. You can then build a lot of meaningful things from that point. And those communities themselves are then all of a sudden able to say, oh my god, my open source software is being used by not-profits in Kerala who are helping with education, by people in Meghalaya who are building a livelihood out of horticulture or things of that sort, right? So yeah, please acknowledge.
Two good role models are Zerodha and Razorpay. There is opensource.razorpay.com where they have listed out all the open source software that they are using. Zerodha, of course, talks very openly about where is Vishnu. You'll hear from Zerodha in the afternoon about how they saved $10 million by using open source.
Yes.
So
again, please don't think that you have to come and give talks. It's okay. Put the information out publicly, even just a simple text of this is just a list of things. Once you do that, then we can come hound you saying, please come and give a talk. You've already written about some of these things. But yeah, this is a process that we can slowly go through, and hopefully as and when there's more momentum, right? Where everybody is coming and talking about these things. It's a very beautiful feedback cycle because there's also something that was mentioned earlier. These feedback cycles are really difficult to break, right? When the the educators are saying, oh, the students are not demanding these things, and the students are saying, oh, the educators like aren't going to help or it isn't going to help. So the best thing to do is if we are able to go and demand our organizations, because then the future people who are looking for jobs are going to say, no, you tell me what are open source stuff you are using in the org. Then I'll think about whether I want to join your company or not. Then I'll think about is this the right place for me or not. And we'll create those sort of positive feedback cycles. And it won't happen unless there is a critical mass of people acknowledging publicly.
Arvinder?
Yeah, I'll speak to a very specific thing, which I'll build on. Being a person of law, I'm not convinced by just telling people. I like to enforce things. And now very likely.
I wish we in the open source community could enforce more.
No, that's fair. I'm coming to that. I'm also a very practical person. So I think the first thing we should do is, and that came to my mind from that very deplorable news that Mahendra Dhoni is patenting Cool Captain. My view of him dropped many notches after I heard that. But I do think that open source community should patent open source. That would only make possible what you're saying, because I will write I do open source, but I will have what I think is open source and you can't do anything about it.